Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to talk about this subject of rethinking globalization. As our host mentioned, this is an issue that is on my mind every day in the context of my day job, which, as director of the Oxford Master of Public Policy, or MPP, involves bringing together 120 public leaders from 50 different countries every year to work together towards a common purpose. As you can imagine, public leaders are accountable to an increasingly fractured electorate, and they have very different normative conceptions of what is a good society. And as we think about ways in which we create a shared purpose for this world, one of the most important things we do is build trust across these individuals, is build trust across societies. And that's going to be one of the themes of what I'm going to talk about today in the context of rethinking globalization. Globalization remains at the heart, one of the key explanatory drivers of one of the most important trends in the way people experience market economies over the course of the last 4 decades. This is the issue that we've got to deal with, whether we're governments or whether we're businesses. So, of course, the question is, how can we respond? And in particular, for this group, how can business respond? And so from the perspective of looking at how various businesses have been navigating these treacherous waters over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, I've come up with 7 basic rules to help you navigate this space. The first 2 rules really sort of work hand in hand with each other, which is don't ignore the problem, but don't become an activist either. And this is really simple and self-evident, as you stated, but it's really interesting how many businesses navigate into these troubled waters pretending that there isn't a storm to navigate. And perhaps the most biting and telling instance of this was, of that first point, was the blowback or the bite back that Goldman Sachs experienced when, in the wake of the 2009 financial crisis, its CEO was quoted on record saying that they're doing God's work. Even if that is true, it was tone deaf to the attitudes and the growing populism that the world is facing. So it's not just important that you are experienced as doing something, it's important that you are heard as doing something as well. So not ignoring the problem is really important. But we often find companies, especially in the last couple of years, have become attuned to the fact that they need to be responding to this. They need to be developing a strategy that responds to the growing populist upheaval and the growing populist disenchantment with globalization. And so they develop a strategy that starts looking like an activist strategy. It starts looking like they're trying to solve the problem of rising populism in the world. And perhaps the most recent and salient example of this is the statement put out by the Business Roundtable in the United States, which is thinking about reimagining or repurposing the role of the corporation in society, recreating capitalism in the vision of a more stakeholder-focused economy. And my perspective on this is, beware taking on a problem that is bigger than one that you can solve. Because if you take that on, you create an expectation that you will solve the problem, and this is a problem that is bigger than any one business, or indeed even the Business Roundtable, which is an agglomeration of some of the largest businesses in the world, can solve. This is a problem that's going to require a fundamental re-examination of democratic society, and it's a problem that businesses can be attuned to, but shouldn't put themselves at the center of. And perhaps the most compelling manifestation of a firm that experienced this and then transformed in light of the feedback was Pepsi under Indira Nooyi. So when Indira Nooyi first became the CEO of Pepsi, she adopted the slogan of purpose beyond profits. And the idea was to reimagine or reinvent the company in a way that looked at its broader social obligations. This, of course, meant reconsidering the role of sugary drinks and carbonated beverages in the company's portfolio. But of course, as we all know, those sugary beverages are a key source of value that the company adds to its owners, to its shareholders. And so within a few years of this strategy, she was getting enormous blowback from her own investors and came within the skin of her teeth losing her job. And so there was a fundamental rethink of the strategy, and instead of purpose beyond profits, it became purpose through profits, which is a much more sensible and moderated way of a business responding to this issue. So that has involved, for instance, instead of completely eliminating carbonated drinks, which might be something that a not-for-profit would do, looking at ways to replace some of the sugar-based additives in diet sodas that might be carcinogenic. That might be something a responsible business would do in the context of purpose through profits. So again, underscoring this problem that businesses must be seen to respond to this issue, but they cannot be seen to be taking on more than they can chew. First, because they're not going to be able to deliver on it, and second, because if they are seen doing that, they undermine the basis of democracy itself, and that can be a source of blowback. The next rule is the idea of an asymmetric capability. And this is actually slightly counterintuitive, but the idea is that how you respond in different product markets, in different sectors, at different points in time, depends largely on the scale of your presence in that market. As a market leader, you are expected to do far more than as a new entrant, as a small player. And it's a powerful insight once made explicit, but again, you often see companies trip on this. And the most interesting example that I've come across of this in recent times has been that of Nestlé, particularly dealing with certain claims that it made on its instant noodle product in India. And what Nestlé used to say on the product was, no added MSG. Now, it's technically a correct claim in that there's no MSG that is artificially added to the creation of the product. However, some of the ingredients that are used in the creation of instant ramen noodles has naturally occurring MSG. So when you look at the term no added MSG, it is reasonable for a consumer to interpret that that is an MSG-free product, when in fact it is not an MSG-free product. It is a product that contains naturally occurring MSG. Now, Nestlé was doing this, but so was every other competitor in the ramen noodle market in India. They were all doing this. The problem is that Nestlé had a 70% market share. So when this became an issue, when this became a scandal, when this became something that the press caught on, it was Nestlé that bore the brunt of this. And Nestlé's excuse and immediate response in this situation was to point to the rest of the marketplace and say, but they're doing it too. And that never works. That never works, especially if you are the market leader. And what ended up happening was that Nestlé ended up experiencing a massive decline in its own market share. That market share fell from 70% to under 50% in less than 6 months, in part because it was experienced as being an untrustworthy brand in the context of its response to the scandal. It had to destroy tens of millions of perfectly good inventory as part of its reinvention program to signal to its consumers that it was, in fact, a credible company. And this was perfectly good product in a country with so much malnutrition that the company had to destroy because it had lost the trust game with its consumers over a claim that could have been misinterpreted. But the idea that as market leader, you have a higher responsibility than, say, a follower or a new entrant is one that companies often fail to realize. And if you're taking your moral cue to respond from the new entrant or the smaller players in your industry, chances are you're going to run afoul of the public opinion pretty quickly. The final rule here is, all of these first 6 points relate to actions. But in addition to actions, as we've learned from this world, what's really important is perceptions. That is, how your actions are experienced or perceived by people. And oftentimes, companies think they're doing the right thing, know they're doing the right thing, know that they might be on the right side of the technical elements of the debate, and use that as a basis for how it is they engage or how it is they become part of the conversation that they've entered into with politicians or with civil society. But simply those actions are not enough. The perceptions are a really important part of the game here. And again, going back to that Nestlé example, Nestlé was so confident in its claim because it was technically a correct claim. It was a claim that had passed muster in the context of not just the FDA authorities in India, which is where the scandal was blowing, but also in many other FDA type settings, whether it was Singapore, whether it was back home in Switzerland, whether it was in the United States. So Nestlé felt they were right about the issue on a technical basis, but that's not enough, right? The perception of how it is you're experienced, of what it is the intent with which you engage, particularly in this divided world, becomes a really important part of your ability to be successful in any kind of strategy you undertake. And so sitting down and with the people who might be experienced as your opposition and say, do they believe me? Do they think of me as sincere, even if we have different points of view, is a really important part of winning this war, of winning this debate.